What if I told you the very first vampire wasn't born from hell, but was cast out of heaven? That he didn't rise from a coffin, didn't crawl out of a crypt, but fell with burning wings from the highest throne of light. Before Dracula, before Cain, before even the whispers of Lilith, there was a child heaven refused to name, born of an angel who broke the only law that mattered, not to wage war, not to rebel, but to love. And for that, he was erased. But his son became something the world had never seen. Not man, not beast, not divine. A soul sustained by grief and fed by blood. You've heard stories of monsters, of fangs, of coffins, of demons in the night, but this one is different because he didn't kill out of hunger. Not at first. He took his first life from the only person who ever loved him, and he wept. For centuries, his name has been buried, but not forgotten, because now something stirs. A prophecy, a bloodline, a door that may open again, not to hell, but to heaven itself. And if that happens, the heavens won't be ready. So, let me ask you this. What if the greatest threat to divine order was not evil, but mercy? And what if the first vampire was never a villain, but a warning? If you've ever felt like a mistake, like you were born wrong, like the world rejected something in you that was never your fault, then stay, because this story, it might just be your story too.
Some stories disappear because they were never told. Others because someone didn't want them remembered. The tale of Seraphil, the first vampire, wasn't forgotten by accident. It was buried, intentionally, silently, not by time, but by fear. You see, history isn't just made of battles and kings. It's made of choices, what to write down, what to leave out. And sometimes, the most dangerous truths aren't the ones that scream, but the ones whispered behind closed doors. Think about it. How many times have you sensed there was more to the story, that something didn't add up, that what you were told wasn't the full truth? Maybe you felt that in religion, or family, or even your own identity. It's like walking through a house you've lived in your whole life and suddenly finding a locked door you've never noticed before. And once you've seen that door, you can't unsee it. This legend is one of those doors. Not just a tale about blood or shadows, but a memory of compassion punished, of love turned into exile. So why now? Because maybe, just maybe, we're finally ready to ask the questions no one dared ask. Maybe the world is ready to hear a different kind of vampire story, one that begins with mercy, not malice. If something in you whispered yes as you listened, if your heart tightened just a little, like it recognized something it forgot it knew, then this journey is for you. Go ahead, like this video if that feeling spoke to you. Subscribe if you believe ancient truths still matter. And share this with someone who's felt like an outsider their whole life. Because we're just getting started. And in the next part, you'll meet the angel who wept for humanity and the moment everything changed. Let me tell you about Azel.
Before there was a vampire, before the blood, before the curse, there was a tear. And it didn't fall from a human eye.
It fell from an angel. His name was Azul. Long ago, before the rise of empires, before sin had a name, there were beings called the Watchers. They weren't sent to change anything, just to watch, to witness, to report. They stood at the edge of the mortal world like silent monuments. No judgment, no interference, only observation. But Azul was different. At first, he did what the others did. He watched from the veil, distant, untouchable. But the longer he observed humanity, the harder it became to stay untouched. He saw a mother bury her child in frozen earth alone. He saw a father collapse in the field from hunger, his last breath a prayer no one answered. And something inside him cracked. Because even though he was made of light, he began to feel, not pity, not curiosity, but sorrow. Now maybe you've felt something like that too. That moment where you see someone's pain, a stranger on the sidewalk, a face in a war-torn photo, and it hurts, even though you can't explain why. That's what happened to Azul. Only for him, feeling was forbidden. The other watchers warned him, "You are not one of them. Observe, but do not care." But he couldn't help it. He returned again and again, not to fix, just to be near. And then he saw her. Not a queen, not a prophetess, just a young woman, sick and collapsing under a snow-covered cedar. She was dying, alone, unseen, forgotten. And Azul broke the law. He touched her. He sang a hymn no mortal was ever meant to hear. And in that moment, she lived, but he fell. His wings ignited, his name burned from heaven's scrolls, and the stars turned their gaze away. He wasn't cast into hell, he was cast into silence. Not because he hated heaven, but because he loved too deeply. And that was the beginning. A love that broke eternity. A child born of mercy, and a curse the world still doesn't understand. In the next part, we meet the one who should never have existed, the child the heavens feared. Let me tell you about Seraphil.
It should have been a quiet death. She was young, barely more than a girl. Alone in a frozen forest, her breath shallow, her body shaking. No one heard her fall. No one came. Except one. Azel had no right to be there. Not anymore. He'd already come too close, cared too much, lingered too long. But something about this girl, the way her hand curled toward the sky, the way her lips moved in silent prayer, even as life slipped from her lungs. Something in that moment felt like the echo of a story he'd almost forgotten. And maybe you've had a moment like that too, where everything in you screamed, "Don't get involved," but your heart whispered, "You already are." Azel knelt beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He sang. Not a song you or I would know. Not a lullaby, not a hymn. This was a song written into the foundation of the universe. A melody sung only once before, at the dawn of creation. It wasn't meant for human ears. It wasn't meant to be sung again. but it was. And with that final forbidden note, light poured into her veins like gold. Her eyes opened. She lived. But the price was silence. Not for her, for him. Azel's wings ignited in white flame. His halo shattered, and heaven, the very heavens, turned away. There was no trial, no voice of thunder, just absence. He was no longer one of them. But what he didn't know, what no angel, no watcher, no star could foresee, was that in that single act of mercy, a spark had been lit, not just of life, but of legacy. Because a few months later, that girl, Elia, felt something stir inside her. She was with child, a soul that wasn't supposed to exist, not angel, not human, something entirely new. And heaven felt it instantly, not like thunder, but like a shiver through all creation. Because love, when it's powerful enough, doesn't just break rules, it rewrites them. And from that love would come hunger, would come sorrow, would come something the world had never known. In the next chapter, we meet the child born of this miracle, a boy without a place in heaven or on earth. Let me tell you the story of Seraphel.
He didn't cry when he was born, not a sound, just a long, steady breath, as if the child had been waiting for centuries just to exhale. No stars watched that night, no winds sang through the trees. The moon hid behind clouds like it didn't dare witness what had just entered the world. His mother named him Seraphil. She said the name came to her in a dream, a vision of the man made of stars who touched her brow in the snow. No one else believed her. To the villagers, Seraphil was strange from the start. He didn't laugh like other children. He didn't cry. He would sit for hours in stillness, watching the world with pale, silver eyes. Animals weren't afraid of him. Birds landed on his shoulders. Wolves came near without baring teeth. But the people, they whispered. Some said he had no soul. Others believed he was a punishment, or worse, a prophecy. And maybe he was both. But his mother, Elia, she loved him without hesitation, not because he was normal, but because he was hers. And maybe that's something you've needed to hear too, that love isn't always about what you are, but who sees you as worthy anyway. Still, no love, no matter how deep, can hold back what was coming. By the time Seraphil was 12, something inside him had started to change. Food no longer satisfied him. He grew pale, slept for days, and sometimes whispered words in a language no one could understand, not even his mother. And then came the storm. Lightning split the skies. The forest roared like it remembered an ancient grief, and Seraphil collapsed, cold, silent, unmoving. His mother held him by the fire, praying to stars that never answered, but something or someone did. Because that night, Seraphil awoke, and he wasn't the same. His breath was calm. His eyes, no longer silver, burned faintly red. He smiled and walked toward the woman who gave him life. He kissed her forehead. He embraced her, and without anger, without malice, he fed. It wasn't violence. It was hunger. But when it was over, She was gone. And Seraphil cried for the first time in his life. He didn't want this. He never asked for it. But the curse had awakened. And outside, just beyond the trees, Azel watched in silence, knowing that what had just begun was something even the stars would fear. In the next chapter, we face the moment that changed everything. Not the first birth, but the first death by choice. Let me tell you how the world met its first vampire.
Hunger can be gentle at first. It creeps in quietly, a skipped meal here, a strange craving there. But when it belongs to something ancient, something not meant to exist, it doesn't knock, it consumes. For days, Seraphil lay curled near the hearth, skin cold, eyes unfocused. His body wasn't dying, but it was changing, rewriting itself from the inside out. His mother, Elia, did everything she could. She held him, prayed, sang songs from her childhood. She brought herbs, water, bread. But nothing worked, because what Seraphil needed wasn't food. It was something more primal, something sacred, blood. And then, without warning, he woke. He stood slowly, as if remembering how to move in this new skin. His eyes weren't his anymore. Not quite human, not quite angel. Something in between, something burning. He walked to his mother, held her gently. No anger, no fear, just mead. And then, quietly, he bit. No screams, no struggle, only silence, like a final lullaby sung through breathless lips. It wasn't murder, it wasn't evil, it was hunger, raw, holy, terrible. And when it was done, Seraphil didn't roar into the night. He collapsed, and for the first time, he wept. That's the part people forget when they talk about monsters. They speak of what they do, not of what they lose. Seraphil didn't just take a life, he took his own sense of belonging. Because in that moment, he became something the world had no name for. He wasn't a demon, he wasn't a god. He was the first of his kind. And somewhere deep in the forest, Azel felt it. He had watched from the shadows. He had hoped, foolishly, that the curse might lie dormant. But now it was awake, and heaven would not stay silent forever.
Some creatures kill because they choose to, others because they were made to. But the hardest ones to understand are those who don't want to kill, but must. That was Seraphil. After the night he lost his mother, he wandered the forest in silence, barefoot, pale, blood drying on his lips. He didn't understand what he had become, only that food no longer mattered, that water tasted like dust, and that everything around him felt too alive. He could hear the heartbeat of the trees. He could smell the fear of sleeping deer. Even the wind itself seemed louder, whispering truths his soul wasn't ready to hear. And worst of all was the ache. Not just thirst, not hunger, but a gnawing emptiness, like something inside him had been hollowed out and could only be filled by one thing. Still, he resisted. He passed travelers on dirt roads, watched shepherds from the shadows. He stayed hidden, quiet, clutching his chest each time the craving rose, because he remembered her voice, her warmth, the way she looked at him like he belonged. And sometimes love is the only chain strong enough to hold back the monster inside us. But even love has limits.
After 7 days without feeding, Seraphil collapsed beside the ruins of an old stone temple. Skin gray, hands trembling, life slowing, but not dying. 2 men found him there, bandits. They thought he was a dying noble boy, an easy target. They laughed, drew knives. And that's when it happened. In one motion, Seraphil stood. He didn't growl, he didn't roar, he simply moved. Too fast for their eyes, too silent for their fear. One man barely had time to scream before Seraphil's hand closed around his throat, lifting him like he weighed nothing. The second turned to run, but Seraphil was already behind him. His voice was a whisper, not cruel, not angry. He said, "You're alive. I feel it in your veins. I'm sorry." And then he fed. It wasn't like the first time. There was no intimacy, no sorrow shared, only instinct. The bodies dropped, drained and pale, and Seraphil knelt in the blood and cried. Because this wasn't who he wanted to be, but it was who he was becoming. And that's the tragedy of his curse. Not that it made him dangerous, but that it made him choose between survival and his soul. Sometimes the monster isn't the one who enjoys the killing. It's the one who hates it, but can't stop. And as Seraphil wiped his face with shaking hands, he knew something that would haunt him forever. He wasn't a killer, but he was cursed to kill. And that curse would never sleep again. In the next chapter, we follow his path through empires and ashes, through time that forgets but never forgives. Let me take you into the silence of his exile and the years where no one remembered his name, but everyone felt his presence.
Time moved on, but Seraphil didn't. Empires rose, languages changed, names of kings echoed across marble halls, and then were forgotten. But he remained, not living, not dying, just existing, drifting through centuries like a shadow no one could name. He walked through cities made of gold and ruins soaked in blood. He saw temples built in honor of gods who were less powerful than the curse in his own blood. And still he stayed silent. You see, Seraphil didn't seek vengeance. He didn't build armies or spread terror. He hid, because deep down he still hoped that if he stayed quiet long enough, if he starved his thirst and buried his name, maybe, just maybe, he could outrun what he was. But the world wouldn't let him forget. Wherever he went, things changed. Fires dimmed in his presence. Children cried without knowing why. Priests dropped their incense, whispering prayers they couldn't remember. Even the earth seemed to hold its breath beneath his feet. Not because he was evil, but because he didn't belong. And maybe you've felt that too. Like the room goes quiet when you walk in. Like you're made of something the world isn't ready for. That was Seraphil. Every day for hundreds of years. He tried everything. He wandered deserts to starve the hunger. He locked himself in caves. He stayed away from towns, from people, from warmth. But the curse always returned. And when it did, he fed quietly, cleanly. No cruelty, no names, only silence. Those who saw him gave him many titles: the Pale One, the Angel who Hungers, the Sleepless Saint. Some worshipped him, others hunted him, but none truly knew him, because How do you name a soul that no longer changes, that doesn't age, doesn't sleep, doesn't dream? He didn't grow bitter, just quiet. Because when you've buried enough memories, you stop expecting anyone to make new ones with you. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't feel like sadness. It feels like fog, like you've become a story no one's telling anymore. And that's what Seraphil had become, a living myth wandering through a world that had forgotten how to see him. But heaven had not forgotten, because one night something changed, not in the sky, but in the silence. A presence, ancient, burning, stood at the edge of Seraphil's exile, and it didn't come to destroy him. It came to watch. In the next chapter, we meet the ones who came not to punish, but to observe, the messengers of heaven who said nothing, and why that silence terrified him more than judgment ever could.
He had long accepted that heaven had forgotten him. After all, no voice had spoken, no angel had appeared, only silence. But silence is not the same as absence. One night, deep in the ruins of a mountain monastery, as moonlight dripped like silver through shattered stone, Seraphil opened his eyes, and he wasn't alone. At the edge of the room stood a figure wrapped in robes of flame and shadow, 6 wings folded tight like a secret. No weapon, no words, no expression. An angel. Not like Azel, not like the Watchers. This one was different, older, made of something more absolute. Seraphil didn't move, didn't breathe, because after centuries of exile, he knew what this meant. Judgment. But none came. The angels simply stood there, watching, as if studying something still in the process of becoming. Then it turned and vanished. No message, no strike, just observation. And then it happened again. 10 years later, then again, a century after that. Different angels, same silence. They didn't come to end him. They came to witness him. And strangely, that terrified him more. Because silence can mean uncertainty, but it also means expectation. You see, when someone hates you, they try to stop you. But when someone fears what you might become, they wait. And maybe you've felt that before too. Not punished, not praised, just watched. Like someone sees a part of you they don't understand. So they keep their distance, but never quite look away. That was heaven now. It didn't call him an abomination, but it also never called him home. And over time, that kind of silence becomes louder than thunder. Seraphil began to wonder, was he just a mistake or something more dangerous? Was he being spared or studied? And the worst part, he had no one left to ask, not even Azel. The one who broke heaven for him had vanished and never returned. Types, the deepest wounds aren't caused by what people say, but by what they choose not to. And as Seraphil wandered through the centuries, he began to feel it again, a stirring in the stars, a ripple in the silence, because something else was awakening,
not just within him, but across the earth. In the next chapter, the moon turns red. The sky trembles, and a prophecy long buried rises again. Let me tell you what happened when heaven bled, and the world whispered his name once more.
There are nights the sky remembers things the earth tries to forget. It began not with fire, but with silence. And then the moon turned red, not the soft blush of an eclipse, not the haze of dusk, but crimson, deep, pulsing, as if heaven itself had begun to bleed. Animals fled. Children woke screaming without knowing why. In some places wells ran black, in others statues wept salt from stone eyes. And far from cities, on the cliffs of a forgotten temple, a blind woman, silent for 30 years, began to scream. She scratched a single name into the stone with her bare fingers. Seraphil. But that wasn't the prophecy. That was just the name. The message came next, etched in shaking lines, torn into granite. When the blood of the first drinks the light of a child unborn, he shall see not the end of his curse, but its purpose. A pause in the stars, and then another line. From his line shall come one who walks into heaven with blood on his hands, and be neither judged nor stopped. The angels read it in silence. The throne said nothing, because this prophecy wasn't about destruction. It was about return. Not rebellion, but restoration. Not the fall of heaven, but its reopening. And the key was Seraphil. Not as a weapon, but as a doorway. You see, the great fear was never just what he was. It was what might come after him. A bloodline, a child, not born of sin, but born of compassion, the very thing heaven once punished. And now that same blood carried the potential to walk back through heaven's gates. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if the most dangerous souls aren't the ones who curse the light, but the ones who carry it into places it was never meant to go? What if the thing that breaks the curse isn't vengeance, but mercy passed down? And maybe you've seen this in your own life, how pain becomes inheritance, how what once felt like punishment becomes the reason someone else survives. That was Seraphil now, not an ending, a beginning. And somewhere in the world, those born of his blood, diluted, scattered, lost, were beginning to stir. They had his thirst, his sorrow, and some had begun to dream of him. In the next and final chapter, we meet them, the forgotten ones who bear his legacy, and we ask one last question. If Seraphil was born from love, can love still redeem what the world now calls a curse? Let me take you there.
Not all bloodlines are remembered. Some slip through the cracks of history, whispered in the dark, carried in dreams. Not by names, but by hunger, by sorrow, by silence. That's what became of Seraphil's legacy. He never sired anyone.
He never turned others by choice, but something in his blood, in the grief that reshaped his soul, passed on. Not as a curse, but as a seed. And in time, others began to appear. They weren't like him, not entirely, but they were connected. A boy who never aged, a woman who wept tears of blood, a child whose eyes did not reflect sunlight. Some were born, some were made, most were lost. They didn't know his name, but they dreamed of him, a pale figure walking between trees, carving symbols in stone, leaving behind messages only seen in moonlight. I was like you. You are not forgotten. You were not born evil. Some of these echoes tried to live quietly. They resisted the hunger. They stayed hidden. They clung to the memory of warmth they'd never truly felt. Others didn't. They gave in. They fed wildly. They became the stories we now tell, of monsters in the dark, of demons with teeth. And slowly, the line between Seraphil's sorrow and their sin blurred. The world no longer saw difference, only danger. And so the word vampire became a curse. But what if it wasn't? What if that word soaked in fear was meant to be a reminder, not of evil, but of a forgotten grief? You see, when we lose the origin of something, we often mistake it for darkness. But the beginning of this story was never wickedness. It was mercy. Maybe that's the question we've been circling all along. Are vampires truly born evil? Or are they simply the remnants of someone the world refused to understand? And maybe, just maybe, the hunger that lives in them isn't for blood, but for belonging, for peace, for light, for home. Seraphil never asked to be remembered, but maybe now, after centuries of silence, his story can help us remember something else. That not every monster began as one, and not every curse is the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a deeper kind of hope. Thank you for walking this journey. And if something in this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, a quiet ache, then maybe, like Seraphil, you are never as alone as you thought. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that legends are more than myths. They're mirrors. And who knows? Maybe one day, when the moon turns crimson again, you will remember his name. Seraphil. The first. The forgotten. The flame that never asked to burn, but still does.